Hi everyone, thanks for joining our stream today. We are going to talk today about myths that come up in the EB1A process. And I have 3 of them to go over with you, but if you have comments, I would actually really like to hear what you have all been hearing out there in the world. I want to know what you've been hearing from your employer's attorneys, from your peers, from crazy social media posts, from Reddit. So tell me all the myths that are floating around, and we can talk through them in more detail, and I'll explain why they're myths. Like with all good myths, there's probably some merit to them, like some grain of truth in there. So we can unpack that. But I'll start with my list of 3 because I think that they're all pretty pervasive out in the industry right now. So the first myth is that you need papers and those papers need to be cited. So you need to claim authorship, and papers and citations are everything. This is a really pervasive myth, and I hear it for people with all kinds of profiles. I hear it from not only professors, researchers, the people who would typically be expected to meet this criterion, but I also hear it from engineers who've never thought about publishing a day in their life, and it wouldn't make sense for their field to do so. I've heard it from artists who have nothing writing related has to do with their art. I've also heard it from business leaders who have never written anything, who may have the ability to shadow write something or have someone shadow write something for them, but have never thought about putting anything, on paper with their name as an author. For all the scenarios that I just shared, it's not natural to expect that those groups of people would have papers, and it's not natural to think that those papers should be cited a lot. For those groups of people, they could claim authorship, so it's something to consider, especially if you are in the process of profile building and you are in one of those groups. Claiming authorship is really good. It's a good add to the case. It does help USCIS check some boxes and move you closer to that final merits determination, but it is not a requirement. And I know there are many out there who look at the prospect of authoring a paper as super daunting because they hate writing, never want to write. It's so far out of their wheelhouse that putting energy towards that would just be really demoralizing in the process. And for that group of people, I say discount it entirely. Don't author anything because it's just going to bog you down, slow you down, and it's not going to make sense for your profile or for your career. Do the things that are going to actually help your career and actually make sense for your personality and your style and your expertise. And those things are going to be much better suited for an EB1A case. So, myth number 1, you need papers and citations. You absolutely do not. It's a total myth. It is helpful to have such things, so it should be considered, but don't let anyone tell you it's a requirement because it's not. The second myth that I've been actually seeing come up a lot, especially among groups of people who have been talking with their employer's attorneys, because they want some support in potentially transitioning from a perm-based process to an EB1A process. And that is that some kind of high-level leadership title or roles and responsibilities are a requirement for the EB1. I think I was talking to a senior manager the other day who implied that his employer's attorney kind of scoffed when he wanted to explore EB1A because he didn't have a C-suite title. He didn't have the title of CFO, and he wasn't necessarily fully risen in the ranks of their company. And this is a myth as well. I do EB1As all the time for people who have the very generic title engineer, or systems analyst, or a lot of times something senior like senior scientist, or I'm thinking like just the plain title of architect or something like that. And so these aren't junior positions. I do see how a junior position would minimize your chances of approval, but they're not leadership roles. You don't need to be in a leadership role to get EB1A. EB1A is for top experts who have been acknowledged to have risen to the top of their field. And sometimes that applies to technical experts. It applies to technical experts who are doing extraordinary things in research. It applies to extraordinary engineers. It applies to extraordinary artists who are like just practicing their craft, but they're not serving in a kind of leadership capacity. And it also applies to extraordinary athletes and team members and all of that. So I want to dispel this myth. It comes about a lot, I think, when attorneys try to set bright lines or try to say, well, if the organization can only sponsor people who've risen to the top of their field, then that means they must have risen to the top of our organization. And that's, I think, the wrong way to look at it. Especially if you're an organization who says you only recruit the top talent at the top of the field. Like at that point in time, you should be applying for EB-1As for everybody in your company because they're arguably top of the field. That's what you advertise, that's what you put out. So you definitely don't need a leadership title for that kind of progression of career or arrangement. So myth number 2, you need a leadership title. Definitely not true. Just like with the first myth, it always helps. Like it's easier to get a case for a CFO approved than it is to get a case for a financial analyst approved. I mean, that's just facts. But the financial analyst case is not impossible. It depends on the merits and everything else that's going on in the profile. All right, the third myth. The third myth is more of a social media myth. It's something that I see all the time with everyone now involved in EB1A. And that myth is that it's easy to build your profile for EB1A. Or not that it's easy, but it's something that's so within reach or within grasp that if you're not doing it, you're missing out and you're ruining your life or anything like that. And I do want to dispel this myth because building a profile for EB1A means that you need to be at the top of your field. And doing that requires tons of drive and dedication and doing all of those outside activities, extra things that are really, really hard work. They do distract you from your day-to-day job. They do distract you from your family. You can balance it. You can make a plan to effectively do it. The examples are all around. People do this. But it's a lot of work and a lot of attention, and it is not easy, like not one single bit. So especially if you're early on in this process, if you see everyone around you really pushing and really going forward, don't get so wrapped up in all of that you end up not doing things that make sense for your own career, for your own life, for your own family. Definitely think about this for you. And then proceed methodically with that in mind. It's not easy. It requires tons of hard work. But you can do it if you make a plan and if you actually dedicate yourself to the process. I will say as well it's not supposed to be easy. So this is just a note about people who want to go into the process and they want to see everything kind of laid out for them in steps that they can easily take. And oftentimes in steps that they can just pass off to other people. A lot of people do use, for example, shadow writers. They pay for media spots. They pay organizations to kind of do everything for them. And I really recommend caution with all of that. If someone is offering an easy path to EB1A where you don't have to do any work, it brings a major red flag into my mind. And that's because it's supposed to be a lot of work for you. It's supposed to be you establishing yourself as a top expert. And while you can get help along the way, definitely get help, definitely rely on others. It's not easy. So I want to dispel that myth right away. And don't expect it to be easy, and don't search out the smooth road that will be like minimum effort from you. You can seek advice, you can seek some shortcuts here and there, but the expertise, the acclaim has to be real. All right, so those are the 3 myths. You don't need citations, you don't need a leadership title, and it is not easy to pursue this process. Does anyone have any other comments or questions about rumors you've been seeing come up? Because I think it'll be really interesting to kind of dive into that a little bit more.
So there are some questions. I asks, what events would you suggest for civil engineering and construction folks to attend?
So I don't have like a preset list of engineering and construction events or things like that. Jason's been building out some resources. So if you subscribe to his resource list, that could be helpful. You can contact him after this call to see if there are resources specific to that field. But most of the time, when I'm coming across a field that doesn't have a lot of preset activities, so activities that everyone in the profession kind of does, and I give the example of IEEE senior membership for computer science or for engineers. For any other field where you don't have those kinds of standardized activities, I really recommend that you network with other people and figure out what are the top conferences, what are the top conventions, what are the top events that everyone attends and that have good reputations. You can do some research online, but having conversations with other professionals really, really helps kind of weed through all of the marketing stuff you're going to encounter online. I also offer some advice and kind of vetting some things and walking through. Jason does the same kind of thing. So yeah, I don't have anything to suggest here, but I would recommend that you follow those steps to get some resources together.
Sai asks, how many citations warrant an approval?
Yeah. So this is part of the rumor. There's not a bright line count of citations. You don't even need any citations to get an approval. Everything is case specific and should be analyzed in that light. All right. Jason, have you heard any other rumors recently? Just following the trends and everything?
Yeah, people seem to think that you need a fellowship and that you have to claim membership. The other one is needing to claim media coverage.
Very interesting. Most of the social media people I follow actually say don't claim membership or media, so I'm a bit surprised that these are rumors. I guess some of that messaging has petered out and some other messaging has been brought in. Hopefully I'm not part of that, because I do recommend that people pursue membership in media often, probably more than some other attorneys, but they are not requirements. So for membership, for example, having a fellowship might help the case. I do think it adds to some final merits analysis. It doesn't always allow you to claim the criteria. It just depends on the fellowship requirements and the admittance process. But I would say very rarely do cases that I present have fellowships or have memberships. I don't think you need it if you have 3 or 4 other strong criteria. If you're profile building, it's good to look into what's available and actually make the application so that you can be considered for some of those prestigious appointments. But it is not required, not at all. It's actually really hard to win the membership criterion as well. So just be aware of that. Your fellowship might not actually be the thing that matters for the EB-1A in the end. For media, you definitely do not need media. I follow some other people who say if you do media and you are more in an IC, individual contributor type role, it doesn't make any sense and it actually detracts from the case. And while I don't fully agree with the sentiment, there's some merit to that statement. Like if you are presenting media where you're being interviewed or quoted or highlighted or featured, and it doesn't really indicate that there's interest, it's just like a puff piece that's out there, that doesn't really strengthen the case. So you can claim it. The officer might consider it. They might check media off the list for you if it meets the strict requirements. But yeah, media is not a requirement and media is not always a good idea. So tread carefully. I always recommend for the media criterion that if you are being highlighted in the media, you should be saying something that would be interesting to your colleagues. Like you should be saying something of interest that people will want to read. And if you're saying nonsense or it's just a fluff piece that your colleagues would roll their eyes at, it's probably not great for EB-1A either. So just keep that in mind.
Surrender asks, does speaking in conferences mandatory for EB-1A? For EB-1?
No, definitely not. This is actually something that I've heard come up as well. I didn't include it in the myths, but it does come up quite a bit. Speaking in conferences is useful. It's not everything though, and I definitely present cases where the person has never appeared at a conference in their entire life. So it is not mandatory. It also doesn't necessarily neatly fit under any of the criteria. So I'll use it sometimes to support leading a critical role. I'll use it sometimes for original contributions. But there are cases where the person has given speeches and presented at conferences, and I just don't include that evidence in the record at all because it doesn't really add a lot of value. So consider speaking at conferences because it can be good, but it's not everything. Your case doesn't hinge on it. You don't need it. So don't stress if you're working on other really valuable things for the case, and don't stress about adding this. That's the bottom line.
So I ask, so I get SC license where only 16% of test takers pass, will that count towards one of the criteria?
No, licensure does not count towards the criteria. And USCIS has a line in its policy manual about this. So it doesn't matter how exclusive the license is. USCIS will not consider it for membership. They won't consider it under most, if not all of the other criteria. It does sometimes look really good for final merits, but it doesn't on its own establish that you have extraordinary ability. So it would just be a very small part of the case. So if you are thinking about getting licensure just for the EB-1A, I would say skip it. Like it adds that little value to the case. But if you're pursuing licensure to advance in your career, go for it. That's my take on all of that.
Barendra asks, I am early in my career with 4+ years of experience. Only 600 citations, but my work is in energy science. Does this qualify for EB-1A, or should I wait to gain more number of years of experience?
So with 4 years of experience and 600 citations, this is worth taking a look at. It's not probably going to be the strongest of EB-1A cases. So I don't want to tell you that you're going to qualify and you're going to get approved right here on the call. But it's worth looking into and at least making a plan either to file soon, file in a couple of years. A lot will depend, I think, on the other factors surrounding this and how impactful you have been to the cited research, like first author, prestige of journals, the citation counts on individual papers, and all of that.
So I don't see any other questions. I think people sometimes ask if getting a master's or PhD is required for EB-1A.
Oh, right. This is actually a pervasive myth that a PhD is required. There is no education required for EB-1A. So getting a second master's, getting a master's, or getting a PhD is not going to help your chances pretty much at all. It's not something that USCIS usually takes into account. Now, getting a PhD can have advantages for other reasons because in a PhD program, you are often publishing. You are often getting cited. You are often getting access to some of those peer review judge opportunities, academic fellowships. Like the access is definitely there since a lot of the EB-1A criteria skew towards the academic fields. So, I mean, it's not a bad idea to go into a PhD program, but if you are a highly experienced professional, let's say a leader in industry, some claim to fame, you have maybe a few criteria, and you're thinking about getting the PhD, once you get the PhD, you're considered a junior researcher. So at that point in time, it kind of splits your qualifications for the case, and then you don't get the benefits of the PhD research side because you're too junior. And then you also don't get the benefits of your industry side because you've kind of abandoned that part of your career and gone into something else. So there are definite reasons, I think, not to go into a PhD program if you're already really close to qualifying for the EB-1A. But if you are a really early career and thinking about EB-1A, much further in the future, at that point in time, a PhD can be advantageous.
Paul asking for a friend. They're in the PhD in law and philosophy with a focus on immigration for asylum seekers. They still have 2 years left. They have bar certification. Question up. Can they steer the rest of the PhD to create an EB1A profile?
Yes, but it is really tough to qualify for EB1A just 2 years out of the program. For a successful case, they really need to establish themselves as a top researcher in this field. So they need to generate a claim. They need to publish a lot of papers. They need to get a lot of citations. I don't really see another angle to spin this one as far as like going into an industry profile and not research. So for this case, I think some of the traditional guidance would apply. You really do need lots of papers and lots of citations. For everyone else on the call, that's not necessarily true for all of your cases, but in context, that's probably accurate just for this one.
Sai asks if I get an ICCMCP license related to my career or International Cult Council will give a press release saying that I am one of the 1,000 professionals in the world and says that it is a highest pinnacle of code professional field. Would that satisfy one whole criteria?
Probably not, because it's licensure. Potentially if you have the license and then are admitted to some kind of program or group or cohort or fellowship or that kind of thing, potentially you could argue membership off of that. But purely arguing based on licensure is just not a strong argument. It's not going to help with the case.
Also, is getting a newspaper released by ICC.
No. So the media doesn't necessarily count. I mean, you could potentially use the media for the media criterion, but the licensure itself doesn't count.
Madava asks, being speaker in conferences required?
No, not required at all.
So I don't see any other questions.
All right, I'm thinking if there are other rumors that I've heard come up recently. Yeah, I think we've covered mostly everything. There's always weird things that come up here and there. So just overall advice for everyone here. EB1A should be individual. Cookie cutter profiles are not really the way to go. They're likely, I think, to get denied because they don't demonstrate unique individual expertise in a particular field. So don't just copy what other people are doing, and don't believe all of the rumors that say you need this, you need this, and you need this. Because anytime someone says you need a particular item, it's probably a myth and it's probably wrong. I don't want to make that a blanket statement because I haven't vetted all of them, but it's probably wrong. You should come up with a plan that helps you to demonstrate expertise specific to what you are doing in your field. And if you need some guidance on the criteria and everything, you can do a consultation with an attorney. But I think it's also really worth looking at yourself, looking at your colleagues, other experts that you admire and look up to, and think about what is impressive in that group. So building your profile, looking really to your career and to your specific industry or field, and not just trying to, in the abstract, meet some of these legal criteria or legal requirements.
Rendra asks, work focused in battery engineering or in renewable energy engineering does qualify interest?
So I think this is about the national interest waiver. And yeah, it's a good field, but there's more to the NIW than just the field of work. So it's worth looking into. You can do an assessment. But there's a lot to get into, like too much for the live stream.
How impactful is writing a technical book released by a well-known publisher?
It depends on the impact of the book. So it's not enough just to publish one. You do need to show that it is either widely read or has had significant impact, has been cited, has been talked about. You need to show that it has generated some acclaim for you.
Sai asks, Can I show high salary proof in India instead of USA?
Yes, you can.
So, can I show 1 year high salary proof for the past year instead? India instead of currently year, as I'm currently working in USA.
So I mean, the salary analysis always depends on where you were doing the job. So if you were working in India and you made a high salary and you can produce Indian reports and data that show that, then you can qualify for the high salary criterion. But you can't be working in the US and claim that it's a high salary in India, if that makes sense. So everything needs to be put into context geographically.
Kishore asks, I am a global regulatory affairs manager with a decade of experience in the medical devices sector. I lead my company's urology division's regulatory function and work on regulatory strategy submissions and market clearance applications for various classification of medical devices in the US, EU, UK, and Swiss regions. Additionally, I am a certified RAC credential holder from RAPS, Certified Medical Device Auditor, CMDA by American Society for Quality, and ASQN certified ISO 134852016 lead.
Yeah, it's fine. I feel I'll cut it off. So, I mean, I can't do profile evaluations live on the live streams. Like what you've just said is impressive. It's definitely worth a look. It's definitely something I would consider for an assessment. You have some really good factors, but I mean, I'm not seeing 3 criteria here, so we want to really methodically go through the 3 criteria. I don't have an opinion right now on if you qualify for EB-1A.
Brenda asks, how much salary is considered as high salary? What are the matrices? With metrics we look into.
Yep, you have to make an argument. So there aren't clear, bright lines or rules around how USCIS looks at the salary criterion. Some helpful things to look at can be the Bureau of Labor Statistics data from the Department of Labor. You can do similar or relevant other country reports. You can do third-party surveys from professional organizations. You can do some crowdsourced data. You generally want to show that you are in the top 10%, because a lot of salary surveys will survey the 90th percentile as the highest. It's even better if you can show 95th percentile. It's also better if you can show that you're at the top of whatever the reported range is. But you have to make an argument, and you have to be reasonable about it.
Deepal asks, for high salary, can I use W-2 as it also counts the RSU and cash bonus apart from just the base salary?
You could try. I mean, it's not always accepted. Sometimes USCIS will really want to see your base salary and make a comparison based on that. But I will say it's not clear that the Department of Labor data measures base salary. It's really not clear if companies report base or if they report total W-2 earnings. Oftentimes on other salary reports, this is not clear either. Some of them are highly professional. So Mercer does a really good job of reporting base, total cash, and total comp, like all 3. And those are going to be the highest quality surveys and the ones where you can draw more direct comparisons. But yeah, you have to make an argument. There's no rule.
Brenda asks, how much you charge as a fee to file a petition or evaluation of profile?
You can go to waypointimmigration.org and do a free assessment, and also the services page has a bunch of information about our current fees. All right, we should end the stream there. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.